This episode is brought to you by Anytime Fitness. We may talk a whole lot about sports, but when it comes to keeping fit ourselves, there's definitely room for improvement. I hit this point early July. I was just like, I am not in good enough shape. I started trying to walk at least 15,000 steps a day or hiking or just anything to keep my legs moving. Now it's the end of 2023. I feel great. I had a physical 3 weeks ago, and the guy was like, "You're doing great. You're doing better than you were 3 years ago." I felt great. Whatever your goals are, progress is possible thanks to Anytime Fitness. Get a personalized plan and support from an expert coach anytime, anywhere. Visit anytimefitness.com to try Anytime Fitness for free. Start to train for your life. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. See website for details. This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian software like Jira, Confluence, and Trello help power global collaboration for all teams so they can accomplish everything that's impossible alone. Because individually we're great, but together we're so much better. Learn how to unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.com. Atlassian. Tap the banner or visit this episode's page to learn more.
Welcome to Through the Ringer. I'm your host, Tate Frazier, and today we have a very special guest. He is the Ringer's own Michael Pina. He's a man that covers the NBA ad nauseum on this website, keeps us up to date on all the many happenings in the world of the NBA. Michael, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
I do my best, Tate. I do my best.
Well, you're locked in, and I appreciate it because for people like me, I feel like, every single day, the news cycle shifts so much. One team goes from being the team that we all adore and they're the hottest team to, now they're the bottom of the pit, get them out of here, tank, all the many things. And a lot of drama in the NBA world. And speaking of drama, we have to talk about last night's team that caused a lot of drama. That, of course, is the Minnesota Timberwolves. And let's just start there. What's going on in Minnesota, Michael? I'm trying to keep up, but it seems like a lot of chaos.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yesterday, no big deal. Rudy Gobert punched one of his teammates in the chest during a timeout. Little altercation between him and Kyle Anderson. Rudy was sent home at halftime, which is obviously not what you want. The Minnesota Timberwolves somehow won that game against the New Orleans Pelicans, a huge win for them, slotted them into the 8th seed for the play-in. Also during that game in the second quarter, Jaden McDaniels, who will probably make an all-defensive team, an incredibly important player for them, punched a wall and fractured his hand. So he will not be available for the play-in. Rudy Gobert has been suspended for the first game of the play-in, so he will also not be in action. It's just a total mess. I don't really know what else to say about them. We can get into the nitty gritty, but just a weird season for a totally dysfunctional basketball team.
And people forget, they made a big trade. Obviously, we've talked about it a lot on the ringer.com. Rudy Gobert was supposed to be this defensive juggernaut for this team. He was supposed to step in, be the rim protector. He and Karl Towns just haven't been able to find, a world in which they seem to fit with each other on the basketball court. That's been a conversation that's been going on. But I wanted to ask you about, Bill Simmons famously talked about the Ewing theory. Is there a little bit of that happening here? Gobert not going to play in the play-in game. But as we saw against the Pelicans, Anthony Edwards, Karl Towns, they look pretty good without him.
I think it's totally possible, honestly, that the Timberwolves, I'm not going to pick them. I think it's possible that they can beat the Lakers in this game because what we saw in that the last game of the regular season with Anthony Edwards, floor space, they're small with Kyle Anderson at the 5. Sometimes they've got Cat at the 5. He's obviously one of the best three-point shooters of his size in the history of basketball. So clearing the paint for an athlete like Ant, letting him get downhill, letting him finish at the rim, something he can't do when Rudy Gobert is in the game, which is why that trade was so curious to begin with. But offensively, it's going to be really interesting. If Karl Towns can stay out of foul trouble, if the Timberwolves can defensive rebound and keep Anthony Davis off the glass, offensive glass, I think they have a real shot. And I also don't expect Anthony Edwards to rest at all in this game. I think he will go the distance, and he is amazing, and I can't wait to watch.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things with Ant-Man where, he was the number one pick, obviously, but it's almost like he's a little bit under the radar. And I thought a fascinating moment last night after the game. They beat the Pelicans, like you said earlier. But then Zion Williamson, who's obviously not playing, he's, I guess, ramping up right now. We don't really know what the implications are there. But he goes and almost like he's, Dr. J talking to a young player in the NBA. But he goes after the game and says, great game, Anthony Edwards. I really respect your game. And Ant-Man, accepted it. But it just seemed like it was a very funny moment. I wanted to get your thoughts on that moment, and obviously it felt like a strange coronation for a guy who was a number one pick behind Zion.
If Zion had Anthony Edwards' ability to not get hurt, he might be the MVP this season.
Right.
He's amazing. He's my favorite player to watch, bar none. It's just super sad that the Dr. J reference is kind of hilarious. Yeah.
It felt like an old head talking to a young head, and I'm like, these guys are drafted one draft apart.
Yeah, so it feels like Zion's been in the league that long with how much time he's missed. But yeah, it would be really cool if Zion could play. Thankfully, Ant is healthy, and I think he's played like 79 games. He only missed a few games this year, just one of the Iron Men in the league. That's really awesome to see. And yeah, I wish Zion could play because he would be in the play-in also, and it would be really fun to see.
Yeah, let's talk about that game because the Oklahoma City Thunder playing, in New Orleans. New Orleans last year was a team that in the play-in was able to sneak in. Then they gave the Phoenix Suns, a little run for their money there in the first round. They were a very fun team. A lot of people got excited about this roster. What do you see in that matchup? Who do you think actually ends up earning the 8th seed out west? We obviously know that the Timberwolves have it right now, but who do you think actually makes the playoffs there?
Right. Brandon Ingram coming from your favorite college basketball team,
right?
Tate. I think he could be the best, no disrespect to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's going to be first team All-NBA. I think Brandon Ingram could be the best player on the floor in this game. The Pelicans need him to be the best player on the floor in this game to win. He's going to be going up against Lou Dort, who is just an absolute brick wall. It's going to be a fascinating matchup. Shai is going to be going up against Herb Jones, who could also make an all-defensive team, right. One of the better on-ball defenders in basketball. That game's going to be really fun. The Pelicans have kind of been treating the last couple weeks of the regular season like it's their playoffs. They had to win a bunch of critical games, including, they lost the regular season finale, but they won 9 of 12 heading into the play-in. So I like the Pelicans in that game. They're going to be at home. They have Ingram. They have C.J. McCollum, a vet. They've got defenders. They've got some three-point shooters. So I like them in that one. And who's going to make the playoffs was the next question.
Who's going to end up being so like in theory, let's say the Lakers take care of business against a team that, has had some drama. Now we have a Pelicans Timberwolves game for the 8th seed. Which one do you think even not only is the team that would win that game, but is scarier for maybe the 1 seed, the Denver Nuggets?
Yeah, I think that the Timberwolves are the better. They're just way more talented.
Right.
Assuming Rudy Gobert is allowed to play basketball for the team that pays him $200 million.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel the same way. Let's flip to the Eastern Conference because obviously this is a fascinating matchup just because in the playoffs and in critical games, the Miami Heat have seemed to own the Atlanta Hawks. It has not been a good matchup for the Hawks, and now they go up against each other. What do you see in this game? What do you forecast? And is there a world in which Trae Young, finds that ice tray mentality and gets a win over the Miami Heat?
It would be nice to see for the Hawks organization. I don't think it's going to happen, though. Jimmy Butler in a do-or-die game, I'm just not picking, against his team. I don't care who's on the other side. We talk about going the distance. That dude is not subbing out of a basketball game unless it's like a 30-point deficit or a 30-point lead with 2 minutes to go. He's amazing. Eric Spoelstra just seems to have Trae Young's number. The way that they defend him, they're so physical. They blitz all the pick and rolls. I think DeJounte Murray will have to have a big game off ball. He's got to hit a lot of tough contested mid-range jumpers. The Hawks don't shoot a lot of threes. Good news for them is the Miami Heat can't hit a three to save their life. They recently put Max Strus into the starting lineup. Mm-hmm. Kyle Lowry is coming off the bench, though. I don't think the Miami Heat are good. I don't think that they're going to win a playoff series or go on a run or anything like that. Their offense is just not good enough. But in one game to beat the Atlanta Hawks, a team that they've had their number, I'd have to pick them.
Right, and this is Udonis Haslem's last dance, so there's a little bit of an emotional angle there. If you're a Miami Heat fan, maybe you believe in that and buy into that a little bit. I think that's a tough matchup for the Hawks. And then the other play-in matchup that we have in the Eastern Conference, we got the Chicago Bulls traveling to Toronto. They have not played so great in Toronto. Toronto's played well at home. Is there any world in which the Bulls, who have weirdly beat some of the best teams in the Eastern Conference, whether it be the Celtics or the Bucks or the Sixers, right? They've shown up randomly in some of those big games, but they have not been able to find consistency. Is there a world in which they go to Toronto and maybe get the upset here?
I think they could. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if the Toronto Raptors said, we don't even want to show up to this game. We don't want to play. Our coach doesn't want to be here. We'll see you next season. That's totally on the table. I've got a lot of respect for what Zach LaVine's done over the past few weeks, all season, really, to be honest. He's played extremely well offensively. DeMar DeRozan in a close game put the ball in his hands, and good things usually happen. I like Chicago's depth. Also, Kobe White has played really well this year, surprisingly. Patrick
under
Williams
the radar, right? Not a lot of people have talked about him.
Yeah, that's your guy.
That's my guy. I love Kobe.
So I like their depth. The Raptors, it's just such a sad story with them. They just don't seem like they have fun when they play basketball with each other. They made a trade at the deadline to get Jakob Poeltl. I thought he steadied them a little bit, but they just can't function offensively. They're so bad. They're just so bad. They just don't hit shots, and you got to hit shots in the NBA, especially right now this season with offensive efficiency through the roof. You're just not going to win basketball games. So despite their pedigree, despite their playoff experience, I'd have to go with Chicago in that one.
It's the play-in. It's actually fun. We've had some great play-in scenarios over the years despite some of the pushback early on in the play-in. So we'll be tuned in, and thanks so much for joining the show, man.
Thanks, Tate.
This podcast is brought to you by AT&T Fiber with All-Fi. Something tells me that the guy watching sports for 13 hours straight on Sunday, who then stays up watching the recaps of those 13 hours, then calls his friends to talk about it, is definitely going to notice that half-a-second delay.
Get AT&T Fiber with All-Fi and watch sports any time of day from anywhere in your house. Live like a gigillionaire. Limited availability in select areas. Go to att.com/hypergig to check eligibility. Coverage may require extenders at additional charge.
Welcome back to Through the Ringer. I am still your host, Tate Frazier, and I am honored to be joined by the Ringer's David Shoemaker. Shoemaker, it's great to see you, man.
It's great to see you too, Tate. It's like you were never gone.
Hey, it's great to be back. It's great to see your beautiful face. And, when I'm at the Ringer, there is a sport that I talk about a little bit more than maybe I would if I was not at the Ringer. And that, of course, is your expertise, the WWE. We also have the UFC that we're going to get into. But there's a big question. There's a big word of the day. And the word of the day is merger. And that's what's happening with both these sports. I wanted to get into that with you, Shoemaker. What is your big takeaway? How much did you hear about this before it actually happened? And now we got a merger with Endeavor buying the UFC, and they already had the UFC, and now buying the WWE.
I heard about it shockingly little, or a lot less than what you might expect. The whole way through the sale process, which has been a story in its own right, Endeavor was the only whisper that I was getting. People mostly in Los Angeles would say, I'm hearing things about Endeavor, but nothing really concrete. But that's what you would hear even if it weren't the case. Those people are plugged into Endeavor, I did get the feeling about 2 months ago, probably, that a sale was imminent because, I don't know, just the general chatter, the vibe of the chatter changed, but I had nothing. I had nothing to go on. And then in Los Angeles for WrestleMania 39 this past week, suddenly, on the way to the arena on Sunday morning, the word broke that this is the deal was done, and a merger between UFC and Endeavor and WWE was imminent. So they did a pretty good job of keeping it under wraps. The only indication I got that anything was about to happen was that people, stopped returning my text messages for about 24 hours. So maybe I should have known.
Well, that's usually how it goes. And I wanted to ask you about that. You're at SoFi Stadium, WrestleMania. It's, there's all the stars are coming out, right? All the sports media people are in the building. What was that atmosphere like? And then how much was that tied to the announcement, right? Because that seems like very WWE to take advantage of that moment in time and get this out to the public.
So WWE does WrestleMania now over 2 nights or 2 days, depending on, what time zone you're in. It was on Saturday and it was on Sunday. And both days they have a little reception before for some of their, high profile visitors or their business partners and that sort of thing. The difference between day one in the reception and on the floor around the ring and day two might have looked the same to an outsider, but from where I was sitting, it was a pretty marked difference. Day two was a lot more of the important people in media showing up. I was at the reception talking to somebody, and they were like, "Oh, there's the chairman of Comcast. There's the president of NBCU, whatever." Like everybody there was somebody who was incredibly important in media who I didn't recognize. So I think that when you get a big deal like that on a big day like that, and Ari Emanuel and assorted others are involved, a lot of people show up just to sort of pay homage.
Right. And it was a big scene, like you said, and obviously yourself included in the big stars that were in the building. So, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed watching it all, kind of roll out on social media and obviously watching it live. But when I hear the word merger, Shoemaker, and I hear about this big deal, I immediately go to one man who is obviously the face of this sport and has been for quite some time, Vince McMahon. What does this mean for Vince McMahon, and what does that look like in the future?
It's a really interesting question. And for wrestling fans, that's sort of, question number one. Obviously, he was sort of drummed out of the company last year around this time because of some very serious allegations,
right.
And eventually forced his way back in. At the time, he said to facilitate a sale. It was unclear if that was actually the motive or if he was just trying to, use his position as the primary shareholder to just sort of work his way back into the company. One thing that's been indubitably true. Well, 2 things. One thing that's true, I think most wrestling fans would agree on, is that the creative product was better in his absence,
right.
Fresher, more interesting in a lot of different ways. And then the interesting thing is that when he came back, he steered clear of the creative department and just focused on the sale. The night after WrestleMania, the night after this deal was announced, he was back in what they call gorilla position, right behind the curtain on Monday Night Raw, tearing up the script and rewriting it on the fly. And wrestling fans said, "Oh no, we're back." Sorry, he said, "Oh no, we're back to the old way of doing things." He wasn't there at SmackDown on Friday, and it seems to be back to his son-in-law Triple H, Paul Levesque, running creative. But that does throw into question, like, what is Vince McMahon doing in all this? Now, for one thing, after the year he went through, it does seem like there's some motive there. You can imagine a motive of him sort of writing his own ending, right? This has been quite a career, quite a life. He still's got a long time to go. But at the end of the day, people will talk about this merger that values his company at $9+ billion. That dollar figure is sort of a thing that he was chasing for a long time. And what he does now, who knows? I mean, when the deal was announced, a lot of people sort of said, I think that he's just going to get a honorary chairman title and a really nice office and sort of ride off into the sunset. But anybody that knows Vince McMahon knows that that's highly unlikely. So we'll see. We'll see what he decides he wants to do at this time, because he's not the majority shareholder in the way that he was with WWE anymore in this new endeavor, pun definitely intended. But he's still going to be a major power player. And when you look at him and Ari Emanuel on CNBC and announcing the sale, when you see, I mean, he's still this personality, this larger than life character. And when you make this kind of deal with WWE, you want to have the product, but you also want to have, the Barnum, you want to have the big, larger than life face attached to it. And what that means in terms of day to day, that's still up in the air.
Yeah, and like you said, he is a guy that tells stories. He's trying to control his own narrative. He wants his story to be perceived in a certain way, and obviously that's a part of the story. Part of the sport is the storytelling. And you mentioned the characters, and I wanted to ask you about just the UFC and the WWE relationship, because we've seen some stars like Brock Lesnar, Ronda Rousey, right, that have been UFC fighters that have made that transition into the WWE. Do we think that we're going to see more of that now that we have this connection, and they're obviously owned by the same parent company? Is that something that we want to see more of, or is that something that we're reticent about a little bit?
Well, I mean, part of the interesting thing about WWE and UFC merging is that their fan bases, while from the outside they might look like very similar products, one being more or less scripted and one being more or less not, their fan bases are very defiant about their distinction, right? We're not into that fake stuff. We're not, we're not into that human cockfighting, whatever. It's like they're very, they try to, it's so similar, I think, that people really try to split the hairs to define themselves. But wrestlers are by and large UFC fans or MMA fans, and MMA fighters, or by and large grew up to be, they got into the cage because they wanted to be Hulk Hogan. I mean, there was there's a deep connection there. Will we see more? I mean, I think you can only expect that the answer is yes, because of now the kind of synergy between the two companies. I mean, one of the things that made, that probably hamstrung that in the past is they're both pretty siloed, not just in terms of each other, but in terms of the world. I mean, if you were an MMA fighter that wanted to be a wrestler, it's not like there was a hotline to call. You had to figure it out. Now, you call your manager, you call your agent, and you say, hey, can I just go to the office next door for a couple of weeks? Yeah, I imagine there'll be a lot more of that stuff, and it'll be interesting to see how all that shakes out.
Yeah, they're going to be, kind of trying to swim together for the first time, as two sports that are now intertwined moving forward. And, that's some great insight. Appreciate you coming on the show. Shoemaker, where can we find all of your work? Obviously, the Masked Man Show is the place to be, but what else do you have going on in the Ringer universe?
The whole Ringer Wrestling Show, the Masked Man Show is a part of it. We have a different wrestling podcast every day. The Masked Man Show twice a week. Cheap Heat, Wednesday Worldwide. A lot of incredible wrestling content on theringer.com.
The best.
We articles. We have the Ringer Powerboard at wrestling.theringer.com, and incredibly good, insightful pieces by just a whole crew of really, really good writers. And we always got some other stuff working on in the background too. I know, Bill winks about the Vince McMahon documentary. We still talk about those things.
Yeah, I think that's something that we can keep winking about because it might be a good one. He is David Shoemaker of theringer.com. Appreciate you coming on the show, Shoemaker.
Thanks for having me, Tate.
All right, there you have it. Thank you to David Shoemaker. Thank you to Michael Pina for coming on the show and breaking it all down for us. This has been Through the Ringer, Episode 2. Stay tuned because coming up right now, it is Kevin O'Connor on his new show, Beyond the Arc. You can learn about everything that's happening in the world of the NBA. This has been Through the Ringer, and we'll see you on Thursday.